Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've built, believed, and trusted is cracking beneath your feet. Your spiritual practices feel hollow. Your old truths no longer fit. You feel raw, exposed, even abandoned by the universe itself. This is what we call a spiritual crisis. But what if I told you that this collapse isn't the end, it's the opening? What if I told you that buried underneath the pain, the confusion, the ego death, is a voice you've been waiting your entire life to hear? That voice is not a guru. It's not a guide. It's not some angelic being from the ninth dimension. It's your inner child. And right now, that child is calling you home. The most powerful spiritual awakenings are not about rising into the stars. They are about descending into the roots, into the soil of your being, into the parts of you that were frozen in time. During a spiritual crisis, we are not just facing the void, we are facing the parts of us we abandoned to survive. And no part was abandoned more than the inner child. The child who learned to hide. The child who learned to shrink. The child who was punished for being sensitive, for being wild, for being too much or not enough. That child didn't disappear. That child became the foundation of your subconscious mind. And now, when everything else is falling away, that child is surfacing not to hurt you, but to heal you. We've been taught that spiritual growth is about transcending the past. But real growth is about integrating the past. You cannot bypass the child within you and expect to build a stable frequency. You can chant, meditate, journal, fast, and visualize, but if your inner child is still carrying shame, still aching for safety, still waiting to be seen, your vibration will always be limited. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're missing something essential. This child is not a metaphor. It is a living frequency inside you, encoded with memory, emotion, and unmet needs. And during a spiritual crisis, this child is often the one who is screaming the loudest beneath the silence, beneath the numbness, beneath the numbness, beneath the collapse.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
One of the first signs that your inner child is calling for healing is emotional intensity that seems disproportionate to the moment. You find yourself sobbing during a song. You feel irrational anger when someone ignores you. You feel abandoned when a friend forgets to text back. These are not just adult responses. These are echoes. The child in you is reacting from a wound that never had closure. And during spiritual crisis, the veil thins. The layers you used to protect yourself dissolve. You are no longer being asked to function, you are being asked to feel. And that's terrifying, because the child in you doesn't trust feeling. The child in you remembers that feeling led to punishment, isolation, or rejection. So your system resists, but your soul insists. The work begins when you stop trying to fix the crisis and start listening to what it's trying to reveal. You ask yourself, what part of me is speaking through this pain? Whose voice does this fear belong to? When was the first time I felt this kind of shame, this kind of confusion, this kind of smallness? You trace it back not to analyze, not to blame, but to reclaim. Because what you're looking for isn't information. It's connection. Your inner child doesn't need you to figure it all out. They need you to sit with them, to witness them, to say, I see you, I hear you, I will not abandon you again. This work is not glamorous. It's not always beautiful. Sometimes it looks like curling up on the floor, holding yourself like no one ever did. Sometimes it looks like screaming into a pillow because no one ever let you feel that rage. Sometimes it looks like letting yourself color, cry, sing, dance, or say things that make no sense to your adult mind. That's healing. That's integration. That's vibration recalibration at the deepest level. Because when you meet your inner child with presence instead of shame, you release energy that has been frozen in your field for decades. And that release is what makes room for the new frequency to land. You might be wondering, how do I know when I've truly connected with my inner child? The answer is simple. The moment you stop trying to change them. The moment you stop telling them to be quiet, to calm down, to get over it. The moment you stop parenting them the way the world parented you, with control, with invalidation, with absence, and instead offer what was missing, unconditional presence. That's when healing begins. That's when the vibration starts to rise, not because you forced it, but because you freed it. During a spiritual crisis, the temptation is to escape, to look for quick answers, to bypass the mess. But every time you bypass the child in you, you reinforce the original wound. You don't matter. You're too much. You're not safe here. So the healing comes when you do the opposite. When you pause. When you slow down. When you place your hand on your heart and simply breathe with that younger version of you. When you say, I'm here now. I know I left you before, but I won't leave again. We're in this together. This is not just emotional healing. This is energetic mastery, because the inner child is the emotional gatekeeper of your vibration. When they feel safe, your energy flows. When they feel seen, your creativity awakens. When they feel loved, your intuition sharpens. But when they feel ignored, your entire system contracts. So if you're trying to raise your vibration, manifest clarity, or access divine guidance during a spiritual crisis, but you've left your inner child behind, you're trying to rise without your roots. And nothing stable grows without roots. Let me ask you something that cuts through the noise. When did you first learn that your feelings were too much? Who taught you that being sensitive was a weakness? Who told you directly or indirectly that your joy was annoying, your pain was inconvenient, or your curiosity was dangerous? Because those voices didn't just shape your childhood. They shaped your frequency. And now is the time to reclaim it. To go back, not to live there, but to liberate what was buried. This isn't about blaming your parents, your teachers, or society. It's about becoming the parent you always needed, the guide you always wanted, the protector, the nurturer, the champion. Not for the world, but for the child within you. Because once that child feels safe in your presence, your vibration rises like a phoenix. Not because you learned a new technique, but because you finally became whole. As you begin to move deeper into this journey, you'll notice something strange start to happen. The more you show up for your inner child, the more the external world starts to mirror that healing. It's almost like reality itself begins to soften, as if the universe recognizes your courage and says, now you're ready for the next level. The people around you may begin to shift. Your reactions become more conscious. Your boundaries become more natural. This is not because you forced change, it's because you've stopped abandoning yourself. When the inner child feels held, your energy no longer leaks through old wounds. and that containment becomes your power. But let's go even deeper, because healing your inner child during a spiritual crisis isn't just about calming emotional triggers. It's about emotionally reparenting yourself on a daily, even moment-to-moment basis. This means learning how to notice when your inner child is activated, and instead of reacting from that place, pausing long enough to respond to them. You might feel a wave of fear before a big decision. That's not adult fear. It's the child who remembers what rejection felt like. You might get defensive in a conversation. That's not simply ego, it's the child who learned to protect themselves through control or silence. When you begin to track these patterns, not from shame but from compassion, you gain access to a level of self-mastery that no spiritual book or course could ever give you. Here's where it gets even more profound. Your inner child is not just a wounded part of you. They are also the most powerful portal into your divine essence. The inner child holds the codes to your original joy, your unfiltered creativity, your boundless curiosity, and your natural connection to the unseen. Before the trauma, before the programming, before the world told you who to be, you were pure vibration. You were magic. And that part of you is still there, hidden beneath the rubble of unprocessed pain. When you heal the wounds, you don't just feel better. You remember who you truly are. You access wisdom that isn't learned, it's remembered. During a spiritual crisis, many of us seek answers from outside ourselves. We look for teachers, signs, synchronicities, or spiritual downloads. But the most transformative guidance often comes from the smallest voice within the one that says, "I miss being held," or "I just want to play," or "I'm scared and I don't know what to do." That voice doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be met. And when you meet it, when you sit down with your inner child and listen as if they are the oracle, because they are something miraculous happens. You stop chasing your healing and you begin embodying it. This embodiment looks very different from the performance of spirituality. It's not about always being calm, perfect, or enlightened. It's about being real. When you're angry, you let the child express it in safe, conscious ways. When you're sad, you let them cry. When you feel joy, you let them celebrate without shame. You stop filtering your life through the expectations of others, and you start filtering it through the needs of your soul. These are the micro moments that change everything. You walk slower. You speak more gently. You become more curious. You ask yourself multiple times a day, what does my inner child need right now? And you listen without judgment, without resistance, without delay. Let's talk about safety, because this is the core of everything. Your inner child doesn't need you to fix the past. They need you to be safe now. They need to know that your body, your breath, your presence is a home, not a battlefield, not a prison, a home. So how do you create that? You start by regulating your nervous system. When you notice yourself getting overwhelmed, you pause and ground. You place your hand on your heart or belly and breathe. You speak softly to yourself, like you would to a scared child. You remind yourself that the feelings are valid, but they are not dangerous. You become the calm that your inner child never got to witness growing up. And here's something no one talks about. The inner child is deeply connected to your nervous system. If your body is constantly in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, your inner child will feel unsafe no matter how much inner work you're doing. That's why embodiment practices are crucial. Cold showers, somatic movement, breath work, grounding in nature, they're not just trendy wellness hacks. They're signals to your inner child that it's safe to be here, that the world is not out to get them, that you, the adult self, are capable of protecting and nurturing them now. This is how trust is rebuilt, not in one grand moment, but in thousands of tiny ones. One of the most beautiful and underrated practices is play. Yes, play, not as a luxury, but as a spiritual discipline. When was the last time you did something with no goal, no productivity, no performance, just for joy? That's what your inner child craves. To paint without needing to be an artist, and to dance without needing to look cool, and to sing off key, to laugh until you cry, or to chase magic. Because in those moments of pure play, your vibration recalibrates to its original blueprint, and the universe responds. Not because you're doing something spiritual, but because you're being fully alive. Let me ask you something that most people never consider. What if your greatest spiritual breakthrough isn't found in your highest moment of bliss, but in the lowest moment when you finally kneel down, hold your own heart, and say, "I've got you now"? What if all the cosmic downloads and third eye activations are real, but they're not enough without the simple act of learning how to truly love yourself, especially the parts you've been avoiding? What if healing the inner child is not just personal, it's ancestral, collective, even cosmic? Because every time you choose to sit with your pain instead of projecting it, you break a cycle. Every time you choose to speak gently to yourself instead of criticizing, you rewrite a generational script. Every time you choose to stay present with your emotions instead of escaping, you become a living example of what it means to alchemize pain into power. This is how you become a spiritual leader, not by accumulating knowledge, but by embodying love. And it starts with how you treat the youngest parts of you. If you're in a spiritual crisis right now, this is not the end. This is the portal. And your inner child holds the key. They are not here to sabotage you. They are here to awaken you, to soften you, to teach you how to feel again. Because only through feeling can you truly receive. And only through receiving can you return to the truth that you are already whole, already worthy, already divine. When the inner child begins to feel safe again, something sacred unfolds inside you. The spiritual crisis, which once felt like a collapse, begins to feel like a clearing. You realize that the pain wasn't the enemy, it was the invitation. Every breakdown, every panic, every moment you thought you were losing your mind was actually a coded message, a soul-level transmission. Come home to me. Not home to your old self, not home to the illusions, but home to the part of you that has been waiting the longest, the child you used to be before the world taught you who to pretend to be. This is not just a layer of healing. This is the root. And when you heal at the root, everything else begins to change. You'll start to notice that what used to trigger you now invites your awareness, not your reaction. You'll witness the same situations arise, but you'll feel a pause, a breath, a choice. That's the sign of a regulated inner child. They're no longer hijacking your nervous system to scream, "Please notice me." They've been noticed. They've been held. They've been loved. And now they've become your ally. They're not pulling you into chaos anymore. They're guiding you toward joy, lightness, and intuition. Because the inner child, when healed, is not a burden. They are your bridge to magic. And this is where the real spiritual power begins to awaken. You start remembering what it felt like to believe without evidence, to trust without proof, to imagine worlds beyond the visible. That wasn't naivety. That was alignment. Your inner child didn't need to know how something would manifest, they just knew it could. And once you reestablish that connection, you begin to co-create with the universe in ways that defy logic. Manifestation becomes less about scripting and more about being. You don't just think higher, you vibrate higher. And that vibration, rooted in inner safety, becomes irresistible to the field. Now, let's talk about something most people miss: integrating the inner child into your spiritual practice. This goes beyond just journaling or inner dialogue. It means actively involving them in how you live. When you meditate, invite them in. When you pray, speak to them too. When you visualize your future, ask them what they want. Build dreams together. Heal timelines together. Let them sit beside you when you do shadow work. Let them draw while you read sacred texts. Let them laugh while you chant. The goal isn't to silence them, it's to fold them into the ritual of your becoming. Because every part of you deserves a seat at the altar. This is where you stop compartmentalizing your healing. You stop separating your spiritual life from your emotional life. You stop pretending that transcendence is more noble than tenderness. You realize that God, Source, the universe, whatever name you use, is not looking for your perfection. It's looking for your presence, and your inner child is your way back into that presence. Because they don't live in the future. They don't dwell in the past. They live here, now, in your breath, in your senses, in your stillness, in your wonder. To heal the inner child is to return to the present moment again and again until it becomes your natural home. One of the most profound practices you can do is to write a letter not from your adult self to your inner child, but from your inner child to you. Let them speak. Let them say what they've been holding. Let them ask you questions. Let them tell you what they need. And then respond. Not with advice, but with love, or with presence, with ears that truly hear. You may be shocked at what comes through. You may cry. You may laugh. You may feel parts of yourself you forgot existed. That's the point. You're not creating something new. You're meeting what was always there. And here's something to remember. This work is non-linear. You don't graduate from inner child healing. You spiral through it. Some days you'll feel empowered, grounded, and clear. Other days you'll feel like a lost child all over again. That doesn't mean you're regressing. It means you're deepening. Each wave of emotion, each trigger, each memory is another opportunity to love yourself more precisely, to hold yourself more fiercely, and to show up more consistently. This is devotion. Not to an idea, but to a part of yourself that was once left behind. Let me ask you the question that will unlock the next level of your evolution as on. What would your life look like if you treated every emotion as a sacred message from your inner child? What if instead of judging your fear, you held it? Instead of analyzing your sadness, you sat with it? Instead of fixing your anger, you danced with it. What if the most spiritual thing you could do today was to listen deeply to what you feel and honor it instead of editing it? Because that's where your freedom lives. Not in controlling your experience, but in meeting it. Not in bypassing your wounds, but in blessing them. Not in pretending to be above your humanity, but in embracing it so fully that divinity has no choice but to flow through you. That's the paradox. The more you love your inner child, the more the universe pours into your life. Not because you unlocked some secret code, but because you finally stopped resisting your own soul. Eventually, the spiritual crisis doesn't feel like a crisis anymore. It feels like a sacred initiation. You don't look back on it with resentment, you look back on it with awe. You see how every breakdown was a breakthrough, how every dark night was a new dawn, how every moment you thought you were alone was actually a moment your inner child was calling you deeper into union. And slowly, your life starts to reflect this wholeness. Your relationships shift, your creativity explodes, your intuition sharpens, your heart softens. And your vibration rises not because you climbed higher, but because you went deeper. Now you walk differently, you speak differently, you breathe differently, not because you're better than anyone, but because you are finally with yourself, fully, unapologetically, tenderly. You are no longer living for the world's approval. You are living for the little you inside who just wanted to be loved, seen, and safe. And in doing so, you become a force of healing just by being you. You start to radiate a frequency that others can feel, even if they can't name it. You become a safe space for others because you've become a safe space for yourself. This is the revolution, not in the stars, not in the heavens, but in your heart, in your belly, in your breath, in the quiet moments when you choose love over fear again and again. That's how you heal your inner child during a spiritual crisis. That's how you rise not above life, but into it. That's how you remember who you are. And now, the only question left is this: will you keep running, or will you finally sit down, look that child in the eyes and say, I'm here now. I'm never leaving again? Because the moment you do, your healing begins.